Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Christe, du bist, Tag und Licht, which translates to Christ, who art the light, and day. This is a relatively short and straightforward chorale. This phrase right here in the second system is very interesting, or at least it sounds very beautiful, and it has some inner workings under the hood that make it very fascinating from a structural standpoint. But we're just going to hop right into the analysis. We have two flats in the key signature. We start on G minor, we end on G major. I reckon we're in the key of G minor here. We start off on G minor in first inversion because of this B flat in the bass. Then we have some passing tones in the lower voices. We then have G, B flat, D, and B flat, which is just taking our G minor chord and putting it in root position, so no need to reiterate the Roman numeral. Another passing tone in the bass here before we get B flat, D, D, and G, which is G minor in first inversion again, starting off with 3 G minor chords. Interesting. Passing tone in the bass again before we get D, A, D, and F. It was a couple of weeks ago when I made a remark along the lines of the reason why we get minor 5 chords, which this is a minor 5 chord, undeniably so, is usually because of the fact that the melody is unaltered and the supporting voices are left to contextualize the melody, which in this case has a flat 7th. So if we were to harmonize that F with as a 5 chord, it would be minor in quality because we need G sharp in order to make, F sharp in order to make it a D major chord. But we see that that's not necessarily the case with minor 5 chords because Bach sometimes uses the natural 7th as well. But in this case, this is an example that makes that argument true. So after this passing 7th in the bass, we get B flat, D, D, and G, another G minor chord, first inversion, and then we have 4 voices moving off the harmonic rhythm. That means that our alarm should be going off in our head. Typically there's a subdivision going on here, A, C, F sharp, and A. That's F sharp diminished over A, which is 7-6, and when we see 1-6 going to 7-6, we typically know what's going to happen next. That's G minor in root position, G, D, G, and B flat. That's exactly what we get. 1-6, 7-6, 1. This B flat here is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it, but it does put the chord in first inversion, so we'll mark it with the figured bass. And then we have C, E flat, G, and A. It's A minor 7 flat 5 over C. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords in cadential situations especially. This D is a non-chord tone. This D is also a non-chord tone. This F sharp is a non-chord tone. And this C is a very brief passing 7th, but in a subdivided manner, Bach is implying a 5 chord here, D major in root position. And then our perfect authentic cadence concludes with G minor, G, B flat, D, and G, which is our tonic triad in root position. Starting things off in the second phrase, we are going to continue in the idea of G minor until we get to the second half of the phrase, which is particularly ambiguous. I'm not 100% certain as to whether or not we are cadencing authentically or the final cadence is a half cadence. Now, my intuition tells me that this is a half cadence, even though there's some disagreement between the melody and the bass, and we'll get to it when we talk about it, but I do think we modulate to the key of B flat major, despite the E naturals that occur. So starting things off, we start off with another G minor chord, G, D, G, and B flat, so we don't need to reanalyze. And then we have the same chord, except for the bass leaps down an octave. Passing tone in the bass here. Then we get B flat, D, G, and B flat, which is another G minor chord, this time in first inversion, so we'll just change the figured bass. Another passing tone, and then we get B flat major over D, 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 F, and B flat, which is 3-6 in the key of G minor. And then we have E flat, G, E flat, and B flat. Now we've entered sort of a modulation zone here where we can modulate to the key of B flat really at any point, and I'm thinking that we modulate to the key of B flat here. Actually, it makes sense. Then this E flat chord would be like a passing 4 chord, E flat major being the subdominant in the key of B flat. So moving into the next chord, we have F, A, E flat, and F. Now, depending on how you look at this chord, you could look at this E as a 7/6 suspension, and I mean, functionally speaking, that is what it is, but in a lot of cases, suspensions provide a tone that's a non-chord tone that resolves to what the chord tone is. So if you're of that disposition in this case, you wouldn't analyze this like I am. To me, this sounds like a 5/7 chord, F, A, E flat, and F, which is our dominant with the flat 7. This is a particularly interesting chord because of the fact that really, if it weren't for these E flats here, I would say that we were moving to the key of F major, because Bach ends up moving to using E naturals in the next measure, which makes a lot more sense if analyzed in the key of F. But the melody seems undeniably B flat major to me, even though the bass looks undeniably F major. So there is a interesting forcing of perspective here by Bach, where the melody implies one thing and the bass implies another. And this is by far not the first time Bach has done this. Bach has a reputation for doing this, where he is crafty and plays with keys where it almost seems as if like there are two keys going on at the same time. How do we analyze this? Well, from the perspective of B flat major, we have F, B flat, D, and G, which would be G minor 7 over F. That would be 6/4/2. This E is a passing tone. This F is a chord tone because it's a G minor 7. This A is also a passing tone. Notice how we have another suspension here that is contributing a tone that is not, well, that is a chord tone. It's kind of like a false suspension, one that doesn't introduce a non-chord tone that resolves to what the chord tone is, but rather the resolution is away from what the chord tone is. And then we get E, G, G, and B flat, which is 7 of 5. Or if you look at this C, I suppose this could be 5, 6, 5 of 5 as well, depending on how you look at it. And then we resolve to 5, which would be F major, F, C, F, and A, which is our dominant in the key of B flat. I'm actually going to erase this because I need the bottom margin for a secondary analysis here. If you were to analyze this in the key of F major, and I know it's been a while since I've done this, this would be 2/4/2 going to maybe 5/6/5. That would be my argument here, some type of 5/6/5 chord, and then we would move to 1. I'm not 100% certain. I hear it both ways. I can hear this A going from 3/2 to 1 if I were to continue the melody to resolve it that way, but I hear this A wanting to go to B flat. That's just the way that I hear it, and even though this chord progression could be rationalized as a more, I would say, common chord progression that you would see in a different key, I think that that's just a statement of the fact that Bach is maybe taking one step beyond tonicizing the dominant here by including the secondary predominant as well. That just so happens to be a common chord between the two keys. Moving on to the third phrase, kind of in an argument for F major, we start off with two F major chords, F, C, F, and A, which is another 5 chord. It would make more sense that this were a 1 chord if we were following the same, I guess, the same idea as the beginning of the chorale, which makes me kind of insecure with the analysis that I chose. But honestly, I think this is just an ambivalent phrase. It has two possible identities. I think it makes more sense, functionally speaking, in terms of B flat, just because of the presence of E flat throughout the phrase here, and then we switch to E natural at the end. It really does sound like a half cadence to me. But all in all, we start off with two F major chords, F being another 5 chord here, F, C, F, and A, passing tones in the lower voices, and then A, F, and C, which is 5/6. And even more interestingly, because we see G melodic minor moving starting in the next beat, I think this is where we modulate to the key of G minor. That would mean that we're modulating over a subtonic 7th chord. This is the second subtonic 7th chord we've modulated over recently, and it's a relatively uncommon thing that Bach does because this is a stable chord, but also kind of an old world chord, and this is one of the things that I was alluding to, the same way that diminished 7th and major 5 are preferred as pre-tonic chords, I guess, as opposed to 5, minor 5, and subtonic 7th because of the presence of the leading tone. But perhaps Bach is just playing with the juxtaposition between the F natural and the F sharp. But after these passing tones in the lower voices, we get C, A, E, and C, which is A minor over C. This is a harmonization of the melodic minor scale, which turns 2 from diminished into minor. And then these passing tones in the alto and the bass give us D, A, F sharp, and C, which is D7 in root position, which is our 5-7 chord. And then we get a really interesting chord progression here, 5-7 to E flat, G, and G. We would think that we'd be going to some type of E flat major chord, but instead the C here, which is kind of like a suspension in a way, takes us to 4-6, C minor over E flat. This C is a chord tone, this F is a chord tone, is a non-chord tone, this B flat is a non-chord tone, and this A is a non-chord tone. But interestingly, if we take the aggregate of all the tones except for this B flat here, we have E flat, C, F, and A. And I think that's important because that gives us another F major chord, or more specifically F7 over E flat, which is 7-4-2. We saw another 4-2 chord earlier, so we know that Bach is using them in this chorale, and 4 wants to go to 7, so the fact that we can extrapolate a 4 chord off of the harmonic rhythm in a subdivided fashion, 4 going to 7, probably the most common subdivided chord progression in all of the chorales so far. Even though we're going from minor 4 to subtonic 7, it's still the motion between 4 and 7 that matters regardless of quality. We then get another sort of deceptive progression here with E flat, G, G, and E flat, B flat, G, and G, which is a 6 chord, E flat major in root position. And then we have 4 voices moving off of the harmonic rhythm, harkening back to how we saw our first phrase. F sharp, A, D, and A, which is a 5 chord, D major over F sharp, which is 5-6, and that would take us where we would expect G minor, G, G, D, and B flat, which is our tonic triad. And then we get B flat, D, and G here. Bach just takes the chord and inverts it, very similar to our first phrase, which makes me feel like maybe we did move to the key of F here in this phrase. I'm sorry I keep going back to that, but really it's fascinating because it's very possible that we stayed in the key of G minor here, but it really does not sound like it. I mean, Bach, B flat, B flat, B flat, B flat. He's really harping on B flat here, and the melody just goes, the bass line just goes from G, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, F. We don't see any F sharps in the bass, we don't see any E naturals in the bass here, implying some type of move to F early on. This is, for all intents and purposes, a B flat major scale. We would definitely expect some we would expect probably some F sharps going on here, some E naturals in this ascending configuration, but having 5 be the chord that we just continue to double up on or triple up on because we cadence on it as well, it's really fascinating. And if we're trying to draw a connection between the first phrase and the third phrase, which there definitely are comparisons between them, both in terms of the rhythms and what's going on in each of the voices and the harmonies as well, right? What's going on in the cadence. It's just interesting that we're going from 5 chords to 7 chords as we modulate rather than starting with a tonic when we really could be looking at this F chord like a tonic. So I don't know. To me it sounds like B flat, but there's definitely some ideation of F major there. I'll just leave it at that moving forward. So after our 1-6 chord here, we have C, E, G, and A again, or C, E flat, G, and A. It's another 2-6-5 chord. We know that Bach loves those in cadential situations. D, D, F sharp, and A is a 5 chord happening off the harmonic rhythm. Very brief passing 7th as well, and that will leave us with a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor. So starting our 4th phrase, we're going to be basically hearkening back to the first phrase that we have. You can see that they're very similar in terms of the profiles, especially in the bass line and what's going on harmonically. They're almost identical to one another. In fact, they might actually be identical to one another. Slight difference here in the tenor and in the alto, but other than that, the phrases are more or less functionally identical. So we start off with D, D, F sharp, and A, which is a 5 chord, and G minor, D major. Then we have G minor, G, D, G, and B flat, tonic triad here. Passing 7th in the bass, B flat, D, and G. It's another G minor chord in first inversion. Passing tone in the bass, D, A, D, and F. Again, this minor 5 chord, that'd be a D minor chord with a passing 7th in the bass. Then we have B flat, D, and G, which is a tonic triad in first inversion. And then again, just like our first phrase, we have this subdivided chord progression here of 1 going to 7, A, C, F sharp, and A, which is F sharp diminished in first inversion. And then we would expect that to go to G minor, which it does, G, D, G, and B flat, tonic triad. And here this B flat takes the chord and turns it into first inversion. And then we see a very similar cadence to the previous phrase and a similar cadence to the first phrase as well. C, E flat, G, and A. That's A minor 7 flat 5 over C. This D, this F sharp, and this C, they're all non-chord tones, but we're getting a 5 as a subdivided chord progression here before a perfect authentic cadence here at the end, where we cadence on our major tonic triad, G major, G, B natural, D, and G. The second phrase, very confusing to me. I'm really interested to see what you think about the phrase, if you have opinions about it. To me, it sounds, like I said, undeniably B flat major, but based on the context in which the phrase is carrying on after the fact, I honestly don't know. And maybe there is an argument to be made that we do move to the key of F major. Maybe we move to the key of F major here and we just have a mid-phrase modulation. But the phrase, even at the cadence, feels like it wants to resolve to B flat, and then it turns around and continues harping on the idea of F major. But if we were continuing in the key of B flat major, we would be repeating 5. It is a very unusual phrase in terms of the context of this individual chorale. I'm just going to chalk it up to it being unique in that way and sort of having a foot in both F and B flat. Or maybe there's something that I'm missing, but all in all, I think this is an accurate analysis. It is depicting what is going on based on what I'm hearing, and that is all I really have to say about today's analysis, other than the minor dominants. That's pretty interesting that we get such prominent minor 5 chords in this chorale. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all the chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You could also hit the notification icon as well if you'd like to be notified of my daily upload, and also like the video if you enjoyed the content. It helps me out a ton. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.